Welcome to the compliance updates for the Northeastern region for April 2022. In Connecticut, unions in Connecticut await flood of labor peace agreements ahead of cannabis licensing. As the process of adult use licensing gets underway in Connecticut, the state's union locals are making deals with prospective operators to satisfy the state's requirements for labor peace agreements. The state's adult use cannabis law includes a stipulation that all prospective adult use retailers obtain a labor peace agreement with a local union before they can be awarded a license. These agreements make it easier for the workforce to organize by preventing employer lockouts in exchange for limits on picketing and work stoppages. Emily Sabo, an organizing director with UFCW, United Food and Commercial Workers, Local 919 said, "This is a new industry in Connecticut, so we're looking forward to building that up and making sure that workers are taken care of." Those requirements were opposed by the Connecticut Medical Cannabis Council, which represents the 4 multi-state operators that control the state's medical cannabis dispensaries. All 4 of them are expected to pursue adult use licenses. So some words here. When you're looking for a labor peace agreement, I suggest asking the union what specifically within their labor peace agreement satisfies the regulatory requirements within your state. You should get this in writing and maintain this for your records. In Maine, new Maine group calls for tougher medical regulations, which is super interesting compared to last week's update talking about the Maine caregiver market and all of the things that they have been pushing through the legislature. So, Protecting Maine's Cannabis Consumers, PMCC, a new cannabis activist group in Maine, is calling on the state to revisit new testing and tracking standards for medical cannabis after the state backed away from those efforts earlier this month. Quote, Protecting Maine's Cannabis Consumers, PMCC, was formed to give a voice to patients at the legislature and to educate the public about the lack of consumer protections in the medical market, said President Kevin Kelly. Quote, for too long, PMCC feels that Maine's legislature has prioritized industry profits over patient safety in the medical marijuana market. Patients need a voice, end quote. Meanwhile, LD 1784, a bill that would require legislative approval for all future proposed regulatory changes in Maine's medical cannabis program, is awaiting a floor vote in the State House. In contrast to PMCC, the Cannabis Council of Maine, a joint coalition of 4 cannabis trade groups, applauded the news that OMP would walk back its recommendations. The council was created late August in response to then ongoing discussion over medical regulations. The council is composed of members of the Medical Marijuana Caregivers of Maine, the Maine Growers Alliance, Maine Craft Cannabis Association, and the Maine Cannabis Coalition. So again, a few words here. Me personally, I really like that the Maine caregivers are pushing back on overregulation. Yes, I do feel like there should be testing standards, and those testing standards should be equivalent to, or maybe even more stringent compared to the adult use market, especially because we're dealing with immune compromised or potentially immune compromised patients. However, the challenges that come with additional stringent testing is also the record retention that's involved there and whether there's a state traceability platform or not. So there's a lot of complexities when it comes to overregulation, testing standards, seed to sale, things along that nature. But if you do want to listen in on the perspective on a Maine caregiver, listen to episode 1 of my podcast, Elevated Businesses, where I have conversations with cannabis entrepreneurs, and really listen to that feedback from Matt Bayless, who is also a licensed operator and one of the first adult use licenses that came onto market in Maine. Another update out of Maine that has potential repercussions for the entire industry. In a hearing, Federal First Circuit Court appears skeptical of Maine's residency requirement. A panel of judges for the U.S. First Circuit Court of Appeals did not appear convinced that the federal prohibition of cannabis precludes the dormant Commerce Clause of the Constitution from applying to ownership residency restrictions within a statewide cannabis market during oral arguments on April 7th in Boston, Massachusetts. In a case with far-reaching national implications, the First Circuit is considering whether or not Maine's requirements that all medical cannabis companies be owned by state residents improperly hinders interstate commerce. Quote, there's some great irony in saying your market is illegal when your state, Maine, along with 33 other states, has chosen to enter the market and regulate the market in a way that discriminates against non-residents of Maine, end quote, said Circuit Judge Sandra Lynch and Maine's legal representative. Quote, that's a kind of basic flaw in the approach here. You're asking us to read Congress's intent that there should be no market while Maine is exploiting the market, end quote. Maine's Chief Deputy Attorney General Chris Taub agreed that interstate commerce regulations cannot apply to any cannabis market as long as that market remains federally illegal. So again, we're talking about the Dormant Commerce Clause. And so whenever we're talking about the Dormant Commerce Clause, I always like to bring your attention to this article right here. The flaws in federal cannabis bills threaten the legal market. It really gives a great breakdown of all of the repercussions and the things that could potentially happen, really depending on this case, interstate commerce, what this applies to all of us. Even outside of this residency situation, there are compounding effects with the Dormant Commerce Clause that we need to consider and probably prepare for, especially as federal legalization is a very hot topic right now. In Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Senate passes a sweeping pot reform bill. So the state Senate passed a sweeping cannabis bill that aims to clarify some terms of a ballot initiative first passed by voters in 2016, while promoting equity within the industry. The bill, championed in part by the state senator and gubernatorial candidate Sonia Chang Diaz, would make several updates to the state's existing cannabis laws, including a first-in-the-nation social equity program for cannabis entrepreneurs. First in the nation. That's interesting. Currently, only about 7% of cannabis businesses are considered quote-unquote social equity businesses, according to the Senate. Because startup costs for cannabis retail stores can easily top $1 million with no help from traditional banks due to federal cannabis laws, opening them is often unattainable for those from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds. The bill would provide grants and loans to this group, funded by marijuana excise tax revenue, which would be about $18 million next fiscal year. On the topic of social equity, this was actually something that was proposed from someone that I interviewed on episode 3 of the podcast, Ari Cohen, who is actually the first delivery and social equity license here in Colorado. Yes, it took us a very long time to even get there. And he actually suggested to reinvest the cannabis tax dollars into those social equity programs. So it's really great to see these initiatives start to develop, and we'll see where Massachusetts takes it. And another update out of Massachusetts. Clarified Massachusetts license ownership rules, tightens limitations. The Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission approved new guidelines at its April 7th monthly meeting that updates the ownership rules for cannabis license holders. The state law that allows the cannabis market in Massachusetts specifically caps license limits for licensees, quote-unquote licensees. The term licensee is further defined as anyone with direct or indirect ownership, neither of which are technically legal definitions, according to the CCC chair, Stephen Hoffman. The new guidance defines an owner with quote-unquote direct control as one who has more than 10% equity or voting interest in a company, has the ability to make operation, strategic, or planning decisions, or can appoint more than half of the board members. An owner with indirect control is when they have direct control over an indirect holding or parent company of the cannabis operator in question. And in New Hampshire, so New Hampshire Senate kills state adult use monopoly bill, postpones homegrown measure. New Hampshire Senate postponed a vote on a bill that would legalize home growing for cannabis on April 21st, one day after killing the state monopoly adult use bill in committee. The committee then voted unanimously to kill HB 1598, which would have created a state-run monopoly on adult use dispensaries similar to how the state currently controls liquor sales. Meanwhile, HB 629, which would legalize possession of up to 3/4 of an ounce of cannabis flower for all adults and allow home growing of up to 6 plants, is the final cannabis legalization bill still standing in the legislature, after several other bills that would have legalized an adult use market failed to survive the state house. In New Jersey, New Jersey approved 7 facilities for recreational cannabis sales. New Jersey gave the green light for recreational sales on Monday, April 11th, and sales began the day after 4/21. Retail sales for the general public would start in 13 dispensaries operated by 7 treatment centers across the state. To get approval, the facilities have agreed that the coming influx of recreational buyers won't interrupt access for patients who are currently using medical cannabis. The facility said they would reserve parking spaces for patients as well as keep hours specific for patients only. There are about 130,000 medical marijuana patients in the state, with an estimated roughly 800,000 potential recreational customers, and fewer than 800,000 estimated quote-unquote tourism consumers, according to the commission. So first, the irony here that they did not even allow them to open until the day after 4/20, but it's what it is. The next article, we're going to dive into how their first day of sales looked like. The first stores to open were MSOs, multi-state operators, and these MSOs have something called ATCs, or Alternative Treatment Centers. And I've seen a lot on social media about people being frustrated that the MSOs were the first to market here, but I mean, clearly in the regulations, if you read the regulations, you knew that the ATCs were going to be the first to market on the adult use side in New Jersey. That's just how the regulations were structured, how the application process was going. So it's really no surprise, is what it is. We're going to dive into some interesting regulatory things in New Jersey that I was actually pretty shocked about. So let's keep on diving right into New Jersey. All right, and the next article is directly from the CRC, the regulatory body that oversees New Jersey. And adult use cannabis sales ready to begin on Thursday. What patients can expect. So they did list out the different dispensaries that they are offering to adult use. And they also provided some disclaimers down here and some reminders for the consumers that expect there's going to be long lines, don't drive while high, like don't cross state lines, which we know everyone from Pennsylvania and Philly are coming over and getting their goods over at New Jersey, but is what it is. So congratulations for New Jersey for opening up adult use, and I'm really excited to see the East Coast starting to open on up. From the CRC, starting Thursday, April 21st, New Jersey residents and visitors 21 years and older will be able to purchase recreational cannabis and cannabis products at 13 dispensaries across the state. The locations, which have been serving patients in medicinal cannabis program, will now open their doors to the broader public. Quote, we expect 13 locations for the entire state will make for extremely busy stores, end quote, said Jeff Brown, Executive Director of the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission, the CRC. Quote, the dispensaries have assured us that they are ready to meet the demand without disrupting patient access and with minimal impact on the surrounding communities, but patience will be key to a good opening day, end quote. The dispensaries are required to put patient access policies in place so that the registrants in New Jersey's medical cannabis program do not have to wait on long lines or risk not getting their medicine. Facilities are expected to implement special lines or hours, online ordering, curbside pickup, or home delivery to ensure patient access is uninterrupted. For more information about patient access, click there in the article. Here are the purchase limits in New Jersey. So, New Jersey, recreational cannabis customers will be able to buy up to 1 ounce of dried flower or up to 5 grams of concentrates, resins, or oils, or 10 100 milligram packages of ingestible items in a single transaction. Notice that says ingestible items. I'll leave that cliffhanger there for you so that way we can dive into this a little bit more in an article or two. All right, and then let's take a look at how many customers were served the first day. So more than 12,000 customers served on the first day of adult use cannabis sales. Looking at a total gross sales revenue of nearly $1.9 million between 7 ATCs that are also MSOs. So congratulations to New Jersey. We knew that the MSOs would be the first to market in New Jersey. Wish that there was a few other licenses that got to dive into the fun on the first day, but it is what it is. More access to everyone. Now let's take a look on the flip side of this. So New Jersey medical cannabis patients fear state won't have enough supply very soon. So a direct quote from one of the patients here. But patients like Keller fear the market they depend on for medicine will be saturated with people flooding dispensaries in search for legal recreational cannabis. Quote, I'm advising people to stock up now on their weed because I expect there to be a run on it. As soon as the first one opens up, medical patients won't even be able to access it anymore, end quote, said Peter Rosenfield, a medical marijuana patient since 2011, involved with the Coalition for Medical Marijuana New Jersey and the New Jersey Cannabis Trade Association. So speaking from experience here in Colorado, we for sure went through this. This is it's a big problem when you have dual supply chain models for medical and adult use, which New Jersey is pretty similar to. It's not something like Oregon or California where you have one single supply chain. It's the time of purchase at the transaction at the point of sale, what determines if it's a consumer or patient based off of your documentation, of course. But this is pretty common, and yeah, the patients are probably right here. Even if the commission is trying to put their best foot forward and require these ATCs to have a significant supply, also treat their patients differently than they do consumers and allow them to expedite their transactions ahead of adult use consumers, they're still going to see shortages in the supply. It's just going to happen. Alrighty, and my last update for New Jersey, I was alluding to this a little bit earlier. So, are marijuana or cannabis edibles legal in New Jersey? State recreational weed law says no, and here's why. So New Jersey voters called for marijuana legalization in 2020, and now the government officially signed off on the start of legal recreational cannabis sales for adults. According to Chris Goldstein, a New Jersey-based cannabis advocate for NORML, don't expect pot brownies in the first months of legal sales in the state. Are you going to be able to get an awesome brownie? No. This is a quote. Are you going to be able to get an awesome brownie? No. Are you going to be able to get some sort of non-cannabis, non-smokable cannabis that you could eat? There will be something, he said. So based off of the regulations and how they say that the purchase limits are for ingestibles, not for edibles, edibles or food products are not permitted in New Jersey, which is very interesting. It appears more and more that New Jersey is based off of the Florida model, where in Florida, the medical side, the vertical integration is very predominant. That's essentially you get one license, you're vertically integrated, and you can have 25 storefronts. New Jersey followed kind of a similar model where you have to be vertically integrated, have your cultivation, manufacturing, and dispensary. And so what I found in these markets that are vertically integrated, because there's usually only a handful of MSOs that are competing against each other in that market at that time, there's not a lot of innovation. There's not a lot of diverse products on the market, not like something you would see in California or Michigan or Oregon or Colorado. It's flour, some hash, maybe some cartridges, and then gummies. That's really all you find in Florida. But in New Jersey specifically, you're not allowed to have any edibles. So if you're looking to open up a storefront in New Jersey, you're really not going to have a lot of diverse products on your shelves in the beginning, unfortunately. So really excited to see this play out, this develop. We really need to have edibles and full access to the plant in all different forms. And New Jersey really needs to update this, and hopefully they will within the next year. Alrighty, and then switching on over to New York. So the public comment period for New York conditional retail licenses opened last week. So that was the first week of April. And this article is out of the Green Light Law Group, which is cannabis attorneys out of the East Coast. And they always come out with really great content. So Let's dive into the article. On March 30th, 2022, the Office of Cannabis Management posted in the New York State Register proposed rules regarding conditional adult use retail dispensaries licensing. The public comment period for these rules opened last Wednesday and lasts for 60 days and is available at cannabis.ny.gov. These rules are subject to change over the next 60 days based on feedback the Office of Cannabis Management receives. We encourage people to participate in the public comment period for these rules. And yeah, this article is really great. So it just dives into a refresher on the New York conditional licensing program. What specifically does it mean to be justice involved? Can nonprofits be justice involved? What are the application qualifications? And then a little wrap up in the conclusion. Good work, Allison Campbell. All right, and then another update out of New York. A proposed New York bill would require MSOs to invest in communities impacted by the war on drugs. So a proposed new New York law would require multi-state operators in the cannabis industry to invest in impact zones. Sponsored by State Senator James Sanders Jr., who's a Democrat out of Queens, S8738A would establish the Cannabis Community Reinvestment Act, which would require cannabis operators to develop reinvestment plans to be reviewed by the Department of Financial Services and obligates operators to invest in communities impacted by prohibition. The bill defines an operator as a cultivator, processor, or distributor that has been in business for at least 2 years, thus all registered operators. The bill would also require multi-state operators to include a reinvestment plan in all future applications and require these companies to defer 2% of their yearly New York profits to the fund the CCRA would establish. So a bit controversial. I mean, what New York's doing is a bit controversial. Personally, I really like Ari Cohen's approach of just reinvesting the overall aggregate of the cannabis tax revenue generated in that state, and not discriminating against like MSOs and single operators, but it is what it is. New York's trying to put their best foot forward, and they're coming up with creative ideas. All right, and another new bill gives tax breaks for cannabis dispensaries in New York State. So New York recently passed legislation that would allow dispensaries to acquire tax deductions on cannabis. What does this mean for the future marijuana businesses? What does this mean for the future of cannabis businesses? Just a few short months ago, cannabis businesses were unable to take out deductions on their state taxes. But now that changing, lawmakers decoupled U.S. Law 280E, which prohibits deductions or tax credits for businesses that sell a controlled substance. Good work, New York. This is a fun one. So, again in New York Way is giving pizza joints, other eateries, okay to sell cannabis-infused food. What could possibly go wrong? New York State officials are weighing whether to allow pizzerias and other eateries to sell fresh cannabis-infused grub and packaged pot edibles, the Post has learned. Aaron Gittleman, a spokesman for the State Office of Cannabis Management, confirmed there have been discussions about awarding such licenses to food preparers, raising the possibility of offerings such as pesto pot pizza or pepperoni with sweet weed sauce. However, quote, the regulations regarding infused food products have not been released yet, end quote, Gettleman stressed. I'm sorry, I guess I just think that there's just so many things that could go wrong if there was an established food, like pizzeria or something, and then also you're selling medicated pizza, and then if you accidentally mixed up those slices or something, or what does the packaging and labeling gonna look like in those? I mean, I love the idea. I mean, I would go get some infused pizza myself, but I just feel like that's just opening you up for a lot of liability, and especially with just how New York's been and how crazy everyone's just been out in Washington Park doing their thing. So, good work, New York. Always coming up with something, right? Alrighty, and my last update out of New York. New York approves first 52 licenses. How exciting. So the approved licenses come from a pool of more than 150 applicants. On April 14th, 2022, New York Governor Kathy Hochul announced the first adult use cannabis licenses granted in the state. The Cannabis Control Board approves 52 adult use cannabis conditional cultivator licenses across the state. The announcement also advances the Seedling Opportunity Initiative, which aims to allow equity entrepreneurs to be the first to make adult use cannabis sales in New York with products grown by New York farmers. And here's a list of the first 52 adult use conditional cultivator license and who they've been awarded to. Congratulations to everyone that got the first round of licenses. Alrighty, and then over into Pennsylvania. So adult use legalization and edibles face tough legislative hurdles in Pennsylvania. Of course they do. On April 21st, Pennsylvania will border 2 states with legal adult use cannabis sales by this fall. It's likely that Ohio will legalize adult use as well. Despite that pressure and Keystoneers streaming across the state borders to partake, state legislators in Harrisburg seem to lack any kind of urgency to enact adult use, says local advocates. But if full adult use legalization made this session, advocates have more hope for an effort by Senator Laughlin to legalize edibles. Oils, creams, flowers, and tinctures are all approved forms sold at the dispensaries in the state, but edibles are banned, just like New Jersey right now. Laughlin announced last week in a quote-unquote a legislative memorandum that he will soon be introducing legislation to include edibles in the medical cannabis program. Pennsylvania legislators use a formalized system to announce their intention to introduce legislation through official memorandums to attract co-sponsors before filing bill language. Advocates are hopeful Laughlin, whose party is in the majority in both legislative houses, will carry his plans through. Another update out of Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Senate approves legislation April 13th that would authorize financial institutions and insurers to provide services to the state's medical cannabis businesses. Senate Bill 1167, introduced by Senator John DeSanto and Sharif Street, would allow but not require banks and insurance providers to serve Pennsylvania state legal cannabis businesses. The legislation would protect financial institutions and insurers that provide services to the cannabis industry from state penalties, essentially codifying the state's existing climate of regulatory non-enforcement. All right, and my last update for you today is out of Vermont. Vermont actually does these weekly meeting announcements by their CCB, which is, again, their regulatory body, which I just really enjoy. I really like that they have the Cannabis Control Board of Vermont does these weekly updates to let you know everything that's happening. So applications opened at 9 a.m. for Tier 1 cultivators, testing in laboratories, and integrated licenses. CCB staff have been fielding a high volume of calls and emails as they enter into the initial licensing phase of the regulated market opening. And they continue to update their frequently asked questions guide. They actually updated it here on the week of April 25th, where they provide an FAQ with more common requests, and of course they're taking questions if you reach out to them as well. So very excited to see Vermont expanding their market and coming on board.